Welcome to Playful Beginnings, a podcast about the magic of play therapy for therapists, students, and anyone interested. In our podcast, we'll explore the deeper understanding of play therapy and the skills we use when working with children.
We hope to help you understand the why behind what we do and how it helps kids heal and grow. I'm Dr. Christy Opiola, a working play therapist and university professor in North Carolina.
I'm Dr. Maggie Parker, a play therapist.
Good morning, Christy.
Morning, Maggie.
I'm so excited to have one of a very prolific child-centered play therapy researcher and educator, Dr. PJ Blanco, who is a full professor at Tarleton State. He has published over 24 child-centered play therapy research projects. He has been department, not chair, but coordinator, clinical training coordinator, all sorts of different hats and roles. And his research has really looked at how child-centered play therapy works with academics and how it works in the school. And so we're so excited to have you here again today. Dr. Blanco, thank you for coming back.
Glad to be here and too kind. So thank you very much. Just glad to spend some time with you guys and sharing kind of some information.
Love it. Okay.
All right, I have another rando question for you.
Sure, love to hear it.
So a few years ago, I was working with a school to start a play therapy program and, had some funding to get supplies and, fortunately my budget was whatever I needed it to be. So I was able to, really think about putting this and it was for at-risk students, so I put the traditional things that are on the list out of Art of the Relationship and that you'll see at the Center for Play Therapy and all those things we were trained on, as well as some maybe more culturally responsive toys. And went in to set up the playroom, and everything that I put on the list that was aggressive was removed from the playroom. So I'm wondering if you have found that there are certain materials that are more acceptable in schools, and which one of those items have been on the ban list of schools you've worked on, and then how you navigate that. As I do know we have school counselors that listen to this, but also, people who will work in schools either through contract or, private partnerships. And I do think this is something that comes up. So I'd love your thoughts on this.
That's an excellent question. I think even Maggie had an article about the use of guns in the playroom. Yeah, it happens all the time, right? So you have aggressive items and the schools kind of decide whether what that looks and what that doesn't look, or if that's acceptable or not. Because a lot of our schools have the no tolerance policy for a child bringing in anything that resembles a weapon or something like that. So the first response I have is I'm kind of laughing is because I remember we were at one school and I had a shotgun. You pull a thing and it would shoot. It looked like a shotgun, but it had a big red thing in the front. But we were in a rural district and there was not an eye batted. Not an eye batted.
Because they all
have them, right? And so being in rural Texas maybe had its advantage in that particular school. But in other schools I've been at, they do have that zero tolerance platform. And I've talked with students a lot about this too. I really value having aggressive items, and that doesn't mean children use the items for aggression, but really having the dart guns, I think, is a really important component to kids, specifically learning control, but demonstrating power and having the ability to have those things to utilize as a way of expressing their needs or expressing their concerns or whatever is happening in their life. And so I really try to articulate the importance of having these items and how they can be used in different ways. The Bobo is one that I've not had much pushback for, which is funny because in the literature you have the for Bobo and the against Bobo. We all know that kids, when they use the Bobo, they're releasing out potentially some aggression on something that's safe to do so. While also we've had kids who feed the Bobo or ride the Bobo like a horse. Yeah. And so
or lay on it for regulation. I'm like, this is as much as a regulation as it is. Yeah.
And so, the rope, I think having a jump rope as your rope kind of helps because most people, it's a jump rope, no big deal, right? The handcuffs are other item that's a necessity, being locked up, having you locking yourself up, I think is a really important tool that kids have in the playrooms. But the one thing I've had to kind of remove, depending on the school, has been having a realistic kind of gun. I've been able to keep the dart guns, but having the realistic gun has been the struggle. And then sometimes the knife, a Bowie knife, I think is those items. And it's unfortunate, but at the same time, as a play therapist trying to do a program in the school, And I know some people are not liking this response is I'd rather have a playroom and a program than not have a program. And so when it comes to push and shove, if a school, you can't come in here because you have this item, I'm going to say, okay, we'll get rid of it. Because I know for
Yeah.
sure there used to be a video clip I would show. It was a family, and the family was talking about how they don't allow their children to ever play with aggressive items. I don't know if you've seen this. It's an
I
older
haven't.
clip. And then the clip, the kids are running in the background with Barbie dolls, and they've moved the Barbie doll so it's kind of a sitting in the sitting position. They're holding that's its head, and its feet are pointing out, and they're going pow pow pow. It's a gun. So I mean, kids. I recognize that I want to provide the words that they need to express themselves through the toys that we have. But at
Yeah.
the other time, kids will creatively find ways too. That's the beauty of play therapy. I think that you want to have a good, well-stocked playroom, and you want it to make it as convenient as possible for kids to express themselves. But even when you can't make it super convenient, kids will find ways to express their needs. And so
Yeah.
that's the beauty of what I think we do. Now, that doesn't mean you should have a playroom with two toys in it. I'm not saying that, but I am saying if you have to minimize certain areas, the hope is that the kids you work with will still be able to find ways to express themselves fully.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah, I was grateful for some consultation because we went some different routes because I wasn't allowed almost everything. The bag was allowed to stay, but the rope had to go, which was a jump rope. But I had cut the hands off, so I just bought
I
another
see.
one with the hands because I find
Angles.
those more dangerous.
Yeah.
Like when the handles are on, right? Because they hurt when they get
You
hit. They're
swing
like
around and
roping.
yep.
Yeah. And we were able to go with the rubberized handcuffs where there's no real
Uh,
locking in, but people could come in and out. They felt safer with those. And then
okay.
someone else suggested a barber set with a blow dryer in it
Blow
because
dryer,
it has
yes.
the image, right? And then which we typically don't have, but one of those toddler hammer with the little thing, the little blocks
Little
that go down
blocks so you hit
up.
down.
So
Yes,
we could
yes.
add that, but we weren't even allowed to bring army men in because they suggested violence. And this was a community that had significant
It's had some
violence.
significant
And at a
violence, yeah.
time in our community where there was a lot of conflict between law enforcement and the
Hmm.
community that the school was in, where, tasing, guns, all of that were a regular part of their community. And I was like, how are they supposed to make sense of this when we take all of these things away? So the razor, the fake
The
razor became a
barber,
taser. All these things became what we
the
needed
other
them to
things.
be. But you had to really kind of think outside of the box to add kind of what we do with sand tray toys. How could they use this? Right. I had to really start thinking about materials in that way to make
Well, and
sure
even
that they
like
had.
the dress up clothes, you might have an opportunity to sneak a part of something like that in the dress up clothes or the
Mhm.
hats, because you have to have a hat. It would make sense you would have, maybe you don't have a gun, but you have the little bat that a cop uses and
Yeah, no,
let
we
the
weren't allowed
kids
to have
maybe see
that
that. I see
either.
that.
Yeah, we weren't allowed to have that either, but I was allowed to have some type of maybe a little golf game.
Okay.
So
So
the
they had the
golf
golf
clubs became,
sticks.
they never
Yeah.
played the golf game, but the golf clubs became
Came
the
the
things that
swords.
we weren't allowed to have, so it
Yeah,
was just an interesting
for sure.
dynamic. And even with, education and other stuff, there was a lot of pushback. And so acknowledging,
That is a challenge because you run into, an ideal world is having that conversation and sitting down with the administrators and explaining.
Mhm.
But oftentimes, administrators are coming from the viewpoint of the community is saying none of these items. I'm saying none of these items, right? One school district we kind of lucked out with is that we don't want you to have these, but we'll try it out. But if we ever hear a complaint or something, you're going to have to remove them. And so we would arrange our playrooms. Oftentimes, our playrooms are in a classroom, so you
Mhm.
open the door of the classroom, and then it's in the playroom's kind of in the corner of the classroom where we've
Yep.
kind of created it. We made it where the aggressive items are always inside. You have to be inside the corner to see them, which is not necessarily what I would do in creating a regular playroom. But in this case, they happen to be right next to the therapist in an area
Mhm.
that you had to be in the playroom to see,
Yeah.
which I think helped a little bit because then less people know that they're there.
Yeah.
That's a great question. That kind of brings up, you mentioned something that kind of brought a light bulb, but I've now lost it, so I'm sorry.
It's
Uh,
okay.
It was about
Maybe it'll
another
pop up.
challenge in the school that you kind of alluded to. I don't remember what it
Mm.
was. So
Well, and I think it's sometimes hard, right? Coming in, I don't remember what it was either. So I'm going to talk and hopefully it'll spur your memory. But,
sure.
you know, I think sometimes I can feel challenged with the idea of being an expert in an area and then my expertise getting so much pushback in a
Hmm.
community, right? You sought me out for my expertise and now you're questioning my expertise here and
Yeah.
how to navigate, that can also be a challenge as a clinician or as a researcher because you want it to partner together, but now you're putting me in such a box. I can't even do the
Mhm.
intervention you're asking me to do out
Yeah.
here. I don't want to walk away from a partnership, but sometimes I've had to choose to walk away because of kind of the boxes that we can get put in due to bureaucracy or
Hmm.
personal feelings about something. But
Yeah, and it's that other piece about, as a researcher, I'm one piece, but my brain's also the therapist piece. That's always trying to
mhm,
explore the why behind. So it
yeah,
sounds like you're scared about having these items. You're fearful that if we have these items, it'll lead to the kids being more aggressive. Let's talk about what that looks like. Let's talk about some of those fears you're having within your community and trying to open up that conversation. Again, opening up the conversation doesn't mean it's going to change, but at least having the dialect of starting it. And I've been lucky in some cases where it has been enough to be, oh, so you're saying that while the kid's using these aggressive items, if they use it in a way that's harmful to others, you're going to set a limit on that. And I
me
said, well,
too.
I do set limits. I'm not going to be, if a kid's in a playroom with a dart
Mhm.
gun, they're not going to shoot me. They can shoot the Bobo and pretend it's me. And here's how that would look,
Yeah.
and that's brought up, that's relieved a little bit of anxiety. But sometimes you run into a system where they're not ready to hear the conversation yet either. And that's okay too.
Yeah.
I always try to go back to, if what I can do can be therapeutic for kids, then it's probably worth me trying. And so it always goes back to how can I best serve the kid, even if I'm maybe without the item that I wish I really could have.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. I mean, I remember being super frustrated at that point in time and
Hmm.
being reminded what is most important. Do you think the program needs to exist or the program doesn't need to exist because you're ready to stake yourself on having a this aggressive toy out in the playroom, right? They'll figure it out a way to have the aggressive toy out there. I don't need to always have every toy. I want to provide as much as I
Hmm.
can, but I also can shift and not
And
be rigid myself.
but it is tough though, because I think as clinicians, as researchers, we want things to be, as by the book as possible. We want to
Mm,
create the best climate for the child to be successful in.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
and
then we
this
run
this
into
partnership was supposed to be a training facility
so
type of thing. And so my
there's
I
added
know where
pressure
my
there.
need was coming from. We wanted this to be a leading component in the community and having these services embedded. And that was what was kind of, sold to us. And then it was, but in this way. And it was, well,
And it is really tough, I think, as play therapists. You can control your playroom, but when you go to the schools, it's oftentimes your playroom might be in a space one month, and then the next month, oh, we've been moved. And
yes.
having to be flexible with that. And with any research, it's tough because you want things to be, in order to do research, there is a rigidity to it, right? You
Mhm.
have all these controls in place. And then you go into a school and those controls sometimes are thrown out the window. I think of a study that Dee and I did with Ryan and Jeff Sullivan on aggression and play therapy. And it was originally designed to be a, what do you call it, randomized control design,
Mhm.
but it ended up being quasi-experimental because the schools were like, no, we're giving you the eight worst kids. There is no randomized control, So we were able to randomize a little bit, but there are no, in order for you to be here, you need to see these two kids and you can randomize the rest. And so you run into those problems as researchers. But the idea here is how can we best benefit the kids that we have an opportunity to see?
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I just got a text message from a colleague.
No worries.
Um, okay. Oh, that totally took me out of time and space here. Yeah, the other thing I have found, here's where I was going to go. The other thing that I have found is sometimes sharing a case story when I get a lot of pushback
Mhm.
about maybe why this could be helpful and being careful not disclosing anything that would be HIPAA, but
Sure.
this is how these things may play out in the play. I hear your concern and let me kind of give you the opposite side of this and how this may or may not be helpful and how kids use these materials in the playroom. And at one point, a colleague and I started to put a video together understanding play therapy and the materials we choose and how kids choose to use them, in particular to talk to our partners that may be adverse to some of the stuff that we
Sure.
bring in so that they can see why it's important. And yes, it's kind of, reframing it to be the best and the greatest and how this is so supportive and, because you're going to pull out your best stories for that. But sometimes I think they need to hear that side to
Hmm.
understand that, I have no intention of anyone harming anyone else or, and sometimes I want to say to the administrators, but what you're sharing says that that's already happening. So help me understand where your concern
Hmm.
is. Are you worried that it's going to get heightened? Or that maybe because they can get that need met in the playroom, it actually will dissipate in other environments. The kid may not need to threaten anywhere else because they're able to get that need met
For
with
sure.
me in a controlled space with a professional who is specialty trained, kind of helping them
Hmm.
articulate
Yeah, and
what is
sharing.
the real hesitation and how this could be really beneficial.
I love that idea of sharing because I remember distinctly talking to administrator a couple of years ago about having a kid who went into the playroom every week and spent 20 to 30 minutes just beating the crap out of the Bobo, yelling names at it and hitting it, but talking to the teacher and seeing the reduction of aggression that she saw in the classroom because he had a space that was safe to do it in and had less of a need to do it outside. And so that was helpful for that administration. So yeah, for sure, having a little bit of case information can go a long way. The one thing that I've also had some a little bit of success with is starting small.
Yeah.
And people don't want you to start small, but really saying, what are the three kids that are struggling in school in first grade? Is it okay if we see those kids this semester just to show you what we're doing? And that way you can hear from the teacher about how things are going and that we can expand in the spring. It's tough because you're usually getting a resource of having some sort of space, and
Yeah.
spaces is really limited oftentimes. But starting small and working with the kids that the administrators see as a problem, because if those kids become less of a problem, then oh, something must be happening.
Yeah. And I want to shout out, there's a great study about that and how that can change school culture. Dr. Krista Phipps, it was her
Oh,
dissertation study. She did a single
okay.
case design and it was in a preschool. But so in single case design, right, you have a baseline and then you have your intervention and then you go
Uh-huh.
back to baseline, but not all kids necessarily start at the same time. There may be interval starts, and she was one that had an interval start to her single case design project. And so they started with the hardest kid in the school
That's
that was the
cool.
most disruptive, and problematic and all of those things. And and they had, I think, two or three other kids that were supposed to come into the study, but working with that one kid first, and then the other started baseline, or they started baseline right before he started, but they needed so many points in baseline. They
Okay.
decreased with the kid's behavior that was getting services. So as his behavior got better in the school, the other behaviors of children around them also got better.
Also got better.
Right. So that idea of let me show
Yeah.
you small and how this can have an effect that we have research that shows not only is the ripple effect for those three kids, but sometimes it also then helps
Bleeds into the classroom.
bleeds into
Yeah.
the classroom holistically, which is pretty fascinating. And it could be, because single case design is not generalizable. Could it have just been this group study? But
Sure.
sometimes when we need to support things, why it would be helpful, we can have a much bigger impact
Yes.
tackling the kids that are, sometimes the most challenging in the classroom too. But I did want to shout out her research because
No, that's
it
awesome.
doesn't
That's good to
get
hear.
talked about a lot, but it was a really kind of cool findings as we heard about them coming
Yeah.
out and the impact of what was going on. And they also had someone come in and evaluate the classroom, and they were also seeing the changes. The blinded evaluators were, not knowing who was getting pulled was able for all the kids to show improvement by one kiddo in the
One
class
kid.
getting services. So sometimes I like to highlight that too, that sometimes if we
Yeah.
can help support.
Which then might help the school counselor who's overburdened, sometimes identifying the one kid and seeing that one kid potentially could even benefit the whole class.
Right,
Yeah.
without taking so much time or feeling you need to see everyone. That's a great point, right? Even just for them to be able to fight for maybe doing more clinical services than, or at least than they're permitted here in our
Hmm.
state. They're really, I mean, they strongly follow ASCA
The
model in
ASCA,
our
yeah.
state, which is, really limits. But
So responsive services is what, 15? It depends on the percentage wise, but it's one of the four, not the whole.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. And there's also a really good study by Jen Geddes Hall for school counselors that show, I think it's in 4 to 6 sessions, which I think they can do under the crisis model. You can show statistically significant change within the
change.
student population when you're doing play therapy in that brief time, that sometimes kids getting a boost of support is
Mhm.
beneficial. So yeah,
And so
both
the
grads
hope
out of
is that
here.
in the future of the world, we can get more play therapists out in the school setting,
Right?
providing care for all kids, because it seems, kids who are doing well in school, kids who aren't doing well in school, kids who have struggles at home, kids who seem like they're doing great, because it's just another added support saying, there's an adult who cares about you, and you also have a place where you can be yourself and be fully accepted. I mean, and I'd want that for all kids. I mean, I have 2 kids, and both of them were in play therapy for a couple of years just because they wanted to. I mean, my daughter has some anxiety, but it was never clinical. But it was just I wanted them to have an extra support of somebody who's just seeing them.
Yeah,
You know,
just we would as adults, right?
for
The
sure.
gifts that we give ourselves when we go to therapy, where as one of my friends say, it's my bitch session. I can talk about whatever I want, how much I want to talk about. I can demean anyone just to get it off my chest, and I feel so much better when I leave. And then I see it so holistically different after that because all that stuff is not swelling in my head all the time. So, yeah. Well, PJ, we are so grateful for your time. This has been fun.
I've really enjoyed it, so I appreciate
Yeah.
you inviting me and giving me the opportunity to talk. It's always good to talk about your research, even though
Mhm.
I don't think we usually do that often anymore, as much anymore. So I
And
really
and we
appreciate the time.
Yeah, our goal here on the Playful Beginning podcast is really to help people to see that there is support out there and what exists, but also the day-to-day of being a play therapist. And I hope we've answered some of those questions as far as, how play therapy can be helpful in the school settings, that we do have data to show and studies that show that play therapy helps with academic success, as well as many of the factors that influence academic success.